to do a brief recap of the conversations we had yesterday. We had a very interesting group of discussions on industrial agriculture and disease and zoonoses. And what came out of those discussions was that consumption is here to stay. It is the economic basis. It's what drives our economies. And therefore, what we need to do is to ensure that we safeguard and maintain both social and conservation objectives and our emphasis on environmental services and particularly vulnerable species like great apes because they are so vulnerable. The consensus from the various discussions is that there needs to be earlier engagement on conservation and environmental issues, and engagement in the planning process particularly, specifically land use planning and economic development programs and with industry, so that the private sector and governments and conservation and science people can talk together and figure out how to meet those economic, social, and environmental objectives. There was an overwhelming call for greater engagement and deliberate efforts to be involved early in the process and throughout that process. There was also a great deal of emphasis on the need to enforce existing laws and to strengthen those laws and to make sure that we adhere to no-go areas and no killing of particular species like the ape. There has to be strict adherence to those laws and transparency about whether or not they're being implemented or not. But what came out strongly is that this is not just the responsibility of range state governments. It's easy to put that on what could be perceived as the weakest link, and then to use that as an excuse for why it's not working and why things aren't being done correctly. There has to be a much stronger taking of responsibility by the governments that are driving the demand and the industries and the investors who are driving the demand. And so the private sector has to take and share that responsibility, as well as the governments who are involved in investing in countries and extracting resources and using the land for extraction or cultivation. Now, none of this is new. It's all been talked about many times before. So what did this conference really highlight? What did this discussion really highlight on the first day? And I think that what did come out that was new was the emphasis on the much earlier engagement, much earlier on in the planning process, much earlier on in the decision-making of where areas need to be protected, what kind of corridors need to be established, and also the responsibility of the investors and the countries that are driving the demand. This came out very strongly and repeatedly, and there was strong consensus amongst all three groups about this. There also was consensus and an emphasis on the collaboration that's required between partners and getting rid of some of that isolation and competitiveness and strengthening the engagement so that there is dialogue and that there are solutions found together that can try and marry those objectives. So really what came out was there is the need for integration of economic and development goals with conservation goals, but that conservation has to be strengthened and the responsibility for when it goes wrong and getting it right has to be shared between all the different players. So I hope that fairly summarizes the conversations that we had yesterday. And I would like to now hand the discussion over to John Bredar, who will be leading the conversation on the illegal trade. Thank you very much.
I'm John Bredar. I am from WGBH in Boston. WGBH is Boston's public television station, but we also produce about 35% of all primetime programming for PBS. And my responsibility there is overseeing all of those national programs. Those are shows that you might be familiar with: Antiques Roadshow, Masterpiece, American Experience, the Nova Science series, and Frontline, our investigative series. Before that, I worked at National Geographic for 26 years, and during my time at Geographic, I had experience with films both on primate intelligence as well as the illicit trade in a variety of goods. So hopefully that stands me in decent stead. And thank you very much for joining us this morning for what we hope will be a very enlightening discussion, emphasis on discussion, about the illegal trade in great apes. So how many of you, just out of curiosity, are familiar with the stolen apes the report that came out this year. So a pretty good percentage. Our challenge is not preaching to the choir and at the same time bringing along people who may not be as familiar as some of the key issues in this area. But based on that report, which was produced this year by the UN Environmental Program through GRASP, over the past 7 years, a minimum of 643 chimpanzees, 48 bonobos, 98 gorillas, and 1,019 orangutans are documented to have been captured from the wild for illegal trade. So that's about 1,800 trafficked great apes that we know about. Like so much illicit trade, documentation is fleeting, and the dark nature of the trade means these numbers are necessarily incomplete. According to the report, based on extrapolations, it's likely that as many as 22,218 wild great apes were lost between 2005 and 2011 related to the illegal trade, with chimpanzees comprising about 64% of that number. The report asserts that increasingly, as with the trade in ivory, rhino horn, and illegal logging, organized criminal networks are moving into the great ape trade. If that's true, then we can expect that these illicit networks, guided by criminal MBAs, will see, like any businessman, opportunity. They won't think in terms of great apes, but in terms of product, a commodity to be got cheaply and sold dearly. There are calls for enforcement as the remedy, and equally valid claims that the trade is demand-driven and that efforts should be directed at stopping the rabid buyers. Of course, very little could happen without the express consent and, in some cases, active involvement of governments, both on the supply and the demand side of the trade. So, what to do? This is all about crime. And, as you all know from a decades-long diet of crime TV shows, talk is cheap. So we aim today for talk that is less cheap, that is, talk that leads to new thinking and action. Should we stop thinking about the kinship we share with great apes and start thinking of great apes as a commodity, just like the bad guys do? How might this shift change the way we pursue those who are complicit, not just in the supply countries, but in the transit and demand countries? How can changed thinking help disrupt supply chains? And is a term like supply chain even relevant here? We're used to thinking of it in terms of Walmart and other massive marketing enterprises. Well, fortunately, we have with us an excellent panel representing a wide range of experiences with all aspects of the illegal trade, from the situation on the ground to enforcement at the transnational level. And now I'd just like to introduce the panelists. After I introduce them, they will in turn speak briefly, and then we'll have a chance to open this up for discussion. So our first panelist is Ben Janse van Rensburg. Sorry, Ben. Ben's Chief of Enforcement at CITES, which, as most of you know, is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species in Geneva. Prior to that, Ben served for 21 years as both a uniformed police officer and later detective in the South African Police Service, or SAPS. Ben was commander of a SAPS specialized investigation unit for 5 years and worked at the Interpol National Central Bureau in Pretoria for 9 years, where he established the Environmental Crime and Cultural Heritage Desk in 2004, serving as commander until November 2011. Ben is also the chair of the Senior Experts Group of the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime. That is a collaborative effort by CITES, Interpol, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, the World Bank, and World Customs Organization, designed to bring coordinated support to the national wildlife law enforcement agencies and to regional and local networks that act in defense of natural resources on a daily basis. Next is Alain Farma, who's from World Customs in Burkina Faso. Alain is currently serving as a customs officer at the Ouagadougou International Airport, Burkina Faso, alongside his position as ambassador and representative of the World Customs Organization's Great Apes and Integrity Project. Through these positions, Alain has had the honor of leading a campaign for advocacy and awareness among colleagues and officials of the customs administrations of several countries, including Guinea, Central African Republic, Cameroon, Gabon, and Mali. During his involvement in the fight against illicit trafficking of wildlife over the past 3 years, he's organized joint activities with the customs administrations of various countries and NGOs dealing with endangered species. Next is Naftali Honig from PALF. Naftali runs PALF, which is the acronym for Project Supporting the Congolese Government in Applying its Wildlife Laws. Naftali came to his work after on-the-ground experience in Asia and Africa. He's worked at the Help Chimpanzee Sanctuary's post-release monitoring in Konkwari-Duuli National Park. Now, through the efforts of PALF wildlife traffickers who in the past lived in impunity, received sentences of up to 5 years in prison. PALF is a member of the Eagle Network, which Naftali co-founded with colleagues from LAGA in Cameroon and Conservation Justice in Gabon. Naftali actively works on both West African and Central African cases and has started building bridges to Asia in order to fight wildlife traffickers on a global scale. Last, Lilly Ajarova. Lilly is the executive director of the Ngamba Island Chimpanzee Sanctuary in Uganda, which cares for over 40 orphaned apes on a forested island in Lake Victoria. She is also director of the Chimpanzee Sanctuary and Wildlife Conservation Trust, a Ugandan charity working to promote the understanding and appreciation and conservation of chimpanzees and their habitats in particular, and wildlife in general. Lilly has been working with great apes in wildlife management programs for the past 16 years in the areas of animal welfare, education, research, field activities, and sustainable development. First, I'll turn it over to Ben.
Thank you. Please excuse me if I go through the PowerPoint a bit fast. I think it might be a bit longer than the allocated time, so I'll have to push on through it. To start off with, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora is an international agreement between governments. Its aim is to ensure that international trade in specimens of wild animals and plants does not threaten their survival. Now, the Convention establishes an international legal framework together with common procedural mechanisms for the strictest control of international commercial trade in species threatened with extinction and for effective regulation of international trade in others. And the Convention is implemented in CITES member countries through their national legislation. Now, CITES regulate trade in close to 35,000 species of endangered of wild animals and plants. CITES does this by dividing these species into 3 appendices. Appendix 1 is species threatened with extinction, which are or may be affected by trade. International trade in wild-taken specimens is generally prohibited. Appendix 2 is for species not necessarily threatened with extinction, but for which trade must be controlled to avoid them becoming so. In other words, international trade is permitted, but it is regulated. And then in Appendix 3 is for species for which countries is asking parties to help them with this protection. International trade is permitted and regulated, but the regulative measures is less restrictive than for Appendix 2. Additional to this, the Conference of the Parties to CITES also adopts resolutions and decisions. Now, resolutions is adopted to guide the implementation of the Convention, and if we talk about great apes, the applicable resolution is Resolution Conf 13.4, which was also revised at the recent COP16. Decisions is adopted to provide specific short-term time-bound instructions. Now, this can be directed to the parties, all parties, consumer parties, range countries, the Secretariat, or the Standing Committee. And indeed, at CITES COP16 that was held in March this year in Bangkok, Decision 16.67 was adopted, which was directed at the Standing Committee to assisted by the Secretariat and other role players review the resolution on great apes with a view of establishing an illegal trade reporting mechanism and present a summary of its consultations and recommendations at COP17. Now, all great ape species are included in Appendix 1 of the Convention and thus enjoy the highest level of protection under the Convention. Wild populations, as we have already heard through previous sessions yesterday, wild populations of great apes in Africa and Asia are threatened by the combined effects of illegal trade in live animals, poaching for bushmeat, disease, and habitat loss caused by disturbance, fragmentation, and destruction. Although it is evident that some illegal trade in great apes take place, data available from official sources at national and international levels currently suggest limited illegal trade in great ape specimens at international level, and I stress at international level. For example, the World Customs Organization had Project GAPEN. This project ran over several months from 2010 to 2011 and as well as the whole of 2012. A particular focus of this operation was great apes. And during this entire operation, no great ape specimens were seized or detected in international trade. The Secretariat also conducted technical missions to gorilla range states in compliance with a COP decision in late 2012. This mission was done in conjunction with GRASP, Interpol, UNODC, and WCO. And again, information gathered and feedback received from enforcement authorities during these missions suggested that although there is some trade in great apes at international level, the trade is limited. The full report of these missions is available on the CITES website. I would like to summarize a few important findings of these missions, which is in some protected areas, armed conflicts and instability pose additional serious threats to great ape populations. There is a lack of reliable information from law enforcement agencies on transnational illegal trade in apes, which makes it difficult to estimate the scale of this trade. There is a need for improved interagency law enforcement cooperation and intelligence sharing. Corruption continues to be a significant challenge to wildlife law enforcement. There is also a significant need for reliable information on the scale of illegal domestic trade in live great apes and meat and body parts thereof. Illegal trade in bushmeat poses a significant enforcement challenge, in particular species-specific identification of bushmeat. Penalties are often too low to act as an effective deterrent, and there is a need for judiciary capacity building in the prosecution of wildlife crime cases. Other findings of these missions were that transboundary management cooperation agreements for protected areas play an important role in great ape conservation, and mechanisms to ensure that local communities benefit directly from gorilla tourism, such as revenue sharing and schemes, have a positive impact on conservation efforts. Now, an interesting development in international law enforcement, especially in related to wildlife crime, is the establishment of the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, or ICWIC. And as John already indicated, this is a collaborative effort between CITES, Interpol, UNODC, the World Customs Organization, and the World Bank, which aims to bring coordinated support to the law enforcement community. Now, united under ICWIC, the 5 organizations have a unique pool of thematically relevant technical and programming expertise, which presents the opportunity for a novel approach to the multifaceted challenges posed by wildlife crime. Each organization offers specialized expertise to support national enforcement agencies and sub-regional and regional networks. The consortium also developed the Wildlife and Forest Crime Analytic Toolkit, which is a technical resource for member states to undertake a national assessment to understand the main issues related to wildlife and forest offenses, to analyze strengths and weaknesses of preventative and criminal justice responses, to identify the need for technical assistance and capacity building, and to design a work plan for technical assistance and capacity building. So in conclusion, continued law enforcement capacity building, adequate legislation, and reliable data for intelligence-led enforcement are essential. But enforcement alone is not enough. There are significant and diverse pressures on great apes. An integrated approach combined with benefits for local communities and strong political commitment to conservation supported by appropriate funding and resources will be required to effectively address the variety of threats affecting great apes. Equally crucial is that activity should be targeted and directed to those pressures that could most significantly contribute to great ape conservation. Thank you. I made it in my 2 minutes.
All right, next we'll turn to Alain.
I don't use a PowerPoint, but I will try to speak orally and quickly because I speak very bad English and I hope that you will get me very well. So I have to make a small presentation about the role of customs on fighting illegal trade and what do the World Customs Organization to develop some tools about illegal trade of wildlife and great apes. Yeah. The World Customs Organization has developed many activities on wildlife issues, and my colleague here explained some of them in the project, the GAPIN project. The GAPIN project is great ape and integrity. Many activities as organized on this project, law enforcement capacity building of the customs through African countries especially, and also joint activities through also African countries, European and Asian countries. The aim of this project was to detect illegal trade on the African areas and also the European and the Asian. The results of the first project activities on this project, we don't do a seizure on great apes, but we do more seizures on ivory, pangolins, and also some rhino arms. But we see that they have a problem, a very problem on the African customs administrations. More than these seizures has been made on European airports or Asian, but in Africa we don't see really more seizures. So we decided to comment on dit, revisser, refaire. Do again. Yeah, thank you. We decided to do a second phase of the project that is GAPIN 2. The GAPIN 2 aims more sensitizations of the customs generally, and also law enforcement capacity building and joint activities also. So during the implementation of the GAPIN 2, I have been nominated to advise to issue advocacy and awareness, to raise awareness among my colleagues in West and South Central African countries. So during this activity, I flew to Guinea, DRC, Gabon, Cameroon, Central African Republic, and my own country, Burkina Faso, to sensitize the customs on all levels, the officials and also the colleagues on the field, to show them that it is important for us, customs, to involve on fighting illegal trade, because you know that the customs are on the front line and of all the countries. So everything that enter or go out of the countries, we have to check. So especially our rules on fighting this, the illegal trafficking of wildlife, facilitating legal trade, collecting and collecting applicable duties and taxes, compile trade statistics to enable monitoring, detecting and investigating illegal trade, shipment and trade better located, frontline and last defense. It is our role generally. Experting of dealing with legal transboundary movement of goods and illegal trade, trafficking of goods also. Power of physical control, detecting seizure and investigation. Global information and intelligence exchange networking place. So generally, it is our role on controlling the movement of goods. But we have also some difficulties on doing our roles. So the African custom generally have a problem on detecting really illegal goods linked to the wildlife animals. If a life or parts, we have also to collaborate with the national organism that look for the wildlife, the CITES national organism, and also the NGOs that deal with wildlife issues. So in Africa, especially, we have to collaborate with all these organizations in order to facilitate our job in the field. So this is a summary of what we do as customs in our country, but I think that you have get me very well. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Alain. Now we'll turn to Naftali.
Okay, so I'll try and get this done in time. So basically, just a really quick overview of who I'm working for and what we're doing is we're in a network called Eagle. It started in Cameroon under an NGO called LAGA, whose logo is there and many of you know, and then it was replicated into a number of other countries: Congo, Central African Republic, Gabon, Guinea recently in 2012, and just recently Togo in this year. So basically, the paradigm, the status quo where we are today is that wildlife crime is a low-risk crime with a very high reward. This is increasing. We see it across the board in all kinds of different wildlife trades. So how can we change this? Our model is basically addressing this first with investigations. So we have investigators on the ground doing undercover investigations, cooperating with the government to do these investigations and figuring out the respective governments in each country and figuring out where the crime is happening, and then collaborating with police forces so that we can get sting operations brought about, and then not leaving it there, but the key part is the legal follow-up. So following up these cases and really babysitting them. We have to basically follow them from that operation all the way to the sentence and even the application of the sentence, because corruption gets in the way of so many cases. So, and then the last step is mediatizing it so that we don't just dissuade the person who was arrested, but the general public gets an idea as well. So yeah, so basically increase, how can we change it? Increase the risk and relativize the reward. The reward will probably remain large, but hopefully it will be not worth it if the penalty is prison time. A lot of people talk about fines. I hear about that more and more. People are getting fines even for ivory trade. And it doesn't really work because it ends up as a cost of doing business. So basically, prison time, I mean, you can't put a value on the time that you spend in a jail cell. So basically, here's a guy that got arrested in Brazzaville for selling chimpanzee meat. One of only a handful. Stolen Apes report talked about 27 across Africa and Asia from 2005 to 2011, which is a really big time period, very few arrests, because we know that there was a lot more. We brought about 9 in 2012, so 2012, 2013, so since then we're trying to increase it a little bit, but the arrest is really only the beginning. And you know, then we have to deal with all the other aspects, like the legislative process and the fact that, that some countries have really weak legislation, others have stronger. So 23 great ape range states. I just wanted to throw up a couple of figures here. The average GDP at purchasing power parity in range states, I looked at it on the World Bank, ranges from $560 to $17,143, averaging at just over $4,600. That figure drops to under 4,000 if you look at just the African range states. So that is definitely less than half the price that I've seen chimps being offered up for sale in the Middle East. So we're talking about a serious incentive in range states to, again, pointing out this very low risk, high reward situation. Corruption Perception Index, published by Transparency International, puts range states of great apes between 50th in the world and 165th in the world out of 176 countries, averaging 31 out of 100 on their rank. So corruption and governance issues is a major issue in great ape range states. And so the important question is here, how many of these countries have sentenced an ape dealer to a year or more in prison? I'm just kind of taking it arbitrarily. Who has served a year in prison in any of these countries? So it's really a difficult situation. So just to paint a little picture of who we're talking about when we're talking about wildlife criminals, there's internet dealers, there's international buyers, there's transporters. Everybody kind of has the mentality of poachers. Everybody knows that for an ape to eventually be trafficked, there has to be a poaching incident that takes place. But we want people to focus on that, but at the same time, start focusing on the traffickers as well, because they're playing a major role in this. So, and I put in the center corrupt authorities, because I've seen situations, many unfortunately, where corrupt authorities are either purchasing, detaining, selling chimps, or issuing false permits. Sometimes people use the legal system and try and push an illegal trade with that. So I want to do this case example. I want to give one really important example for me. Late 2012, a chimpanzee, this is an undercover footage from a hidden camera, a chimpanzee is shown to a potential client in Conakry in Guinea. So this is not the first time that this guy has been showing people chimps to sell. And in 2013, we worked with the Guinean authorities to get an operation where basically his whole stock was seized. Unfortunately, the seizure did not lead to his arrest. So, but I mean, these are just a few of the birds that were seized there. The two on the crowned crane and the ostrich are protected in Guinea. The Turako isn't. I had to wrestle that ostrich myself because no one else wanted to do it. So this guy, Usman, he said that he sold over 500 chimps since 1994. I'll let you guys do the math on that one. That's a lot of chimps. I don't know, it's hard to say exactly how many chimps are killed every time that there's a chimp sold on the market, but it's a lot. That's at the end of 2012 that he was recorded saying that. This is some other undercover footage of this guy, Usman, just to give a picture of how this guy is taking beautiful webs of life and ripping them apart for international trade. These are macaws from South America. I'm sure my colleagues in Asia or Australia can tell me exactly where this cockatoo is from, but far away from Guinea. And he had him in Conakry. So this is the nature of that trade. International, lucrative, and largely living in impunity. Those were publicly displayed, those birds, in 2012. So March 2013, Guinea-Conakry is sanctioned by CITES, as many of you know, largely because of the live animals trade. Demand countries hide behind these permits a lot of times, and like with ivory, we have to talk about demand countries as well. 23 ape range states, but how many states have illegally imported apes? In one way or another, whether the permit had an illegal origin or whether it was illegal once it got into that country under their national laws. Orangutans in Asia, heard a lot about trade in Thailand. chimps and gorillas in Africa and Egypt, and then beyond the continents. I mean, these countries, it's been very well documented, but there hasn't been a lot of enforcement in a lot of these demand countries. So, and I just wanted to point, I know these are not chimps, as most of you probably can recognize, but these were also at Usman's house, the same dealer in Guinea. The back bird is a Timneh African gray. You can notice that his tail is darker than the one in the front, and his beak has a little bit of a light tip on the top there. That is from Guinea. They're really endangered. People don't realize how endangered they are, but they're really endangered. The front one, he has a real bright red tail, is what we call Congo African gray, and does not come from Guinea, and is from Central Africa and a bit of West Africa, but much further east than Guinea. So how did that guy get there? So it just shows how Usman is filtering into the legal trade. He might have been able to get a permit to sell off African grays, but he's selling ones that aren't even from Guinea. And just anecdotally, the two green ones in the middle are red-fronted parrots, and those red-fronted parrots do not occur in Guinea either. And I looked up the quotas on CITES in the past and everything, and I noticed that there were actually a quota for these birds in another country where we're working in Togo, but according to the Red List IUCN website, they don't occur in Togo either. So this is, again, people, I don't know, it needs to be looked at a little bit closer. So live animals trade often operates under the guise of legal trade. International commercial ape trade is illegal. All great apes are. CITES Appendix 1. Most range states are signatories to CITES except Angola. It's really important. Someone needs to lobby a little bit on that angle as well. And it's linked to a multitude of other wildlife trade. This is a guy this is a seizure from Congo. It was linked to a guy that we found out 2 years later was doing ivory poaching. He was trafficking AK-47 bullets so he could hunt elephants as well. Just a little anecdote, a little pellet shows a shotgun pellet pulled out of that gorilla, but he doesn't just hunt with shotguns, that guy. Dealers in Gabon, this is a pretty common picture, but this seizure, there's a lot of great ape heads there, unfortunately. But there's also leopard skins, other skins. I think there was a lion skin in there, python skins. That was in Gabon. There's a famous picture as well from Laga in Cameroon, a little baby chimp there hidden in a car that was smuggling drugs from Cameroon to Nigeria. Another incident in Congo, guys dealing with corrupt police, trafficking AK-47 bullets to hunt elephants, but he also does commercial bushmeat hunting. So these are 3 gorillas he killed with an AK. And then so I mean, it's wildlife, but it's other stuff too that this trade is connected to. This is a boat from in Brazzaville, just across the river from Kinshasa at the end of last year. And a picture some of you may have seen on the GRASP website. I took this picture when I dropped this little chimp off at a vet to try and get him some care. He was suffering from tetanus from that wound. While after I left the police office, these guys started threatening my guys, my teammates, and agents of the state. In this case, we pushed a little bit harder, not just to get the trafficker arrested, but to get the transporters arrested as well. And they started making phone calls and threatening everybody. So, you know, I mean, we don't know exactly the size of the great ape trade. We know that it's existing. It's existing on a local level. It's existing on an international level. But it's not just a question of getting a grip on a small trade here. If it were that simple, I would love it. But unfortunately, we're looking at a not-so-bright future. This is a picture I just took a couple weeks ago at a recently cleared forest. Look in the back there. You can see how beautiful this massive expanse of rainforest is. And that went all the way to where the picture I took, all the way to where I was when I took the picture. But this is recently cleared for palm oil in Congo, as Dave mentioned yesterday. This is going to be the biggest palm oil concession in the Congo Basin. And we've seen what this does in Asia, and we are going to have to take that into account for Africa. So basically, what I want to drive home here is that apes trade is live animals trade. It's dangerously high in Asia. It's growing in importance in Africa. It's part of something, and it's part of something that's the second point that we are not conquering. Apes trade is crime and it's corruption, and even if it's small, if it's large, it is significant, but whatever it is representative of our collective failure. So basically, we need to get that under control because it's going to get worse. If we don't, we're going to end up with a bigger problem on our hands, and in addition to the apes, there's going to be a lot of things that come with it.
Thanks, Naftali. So we've heard 3 perspectives on the enforcement side, and now Lilly will give us a different perspective.
They had issues, difficult ones, lots of gaps. And from the perspective of the sanctuaries, the great ape sanctuaries are a result of illegal trade, with confiscation reports we have indicating that the animals are a result of pet trade. For every baby chimpanzee taken from the wild, 7 to 10 adults are killed. Bushmeat, these are some of the records we have. We do not have a full records of every confiscated great ape in the sanctuaries, but for the records that we have, that's what we have. Entertainment in circuses. Great apes are being traded in for research needs, medicinal needs, and this is becoming really big with demand from Asia. Human-wildlife conflict is another most recent common records that we are having of the great ape that are being confiscated. And I will briefly just talk about the role of sanctuaries in the great ape conservation. With experience from the African sanctuaries, but I believe that it's not so different from the sanctuaries in Asia as well. One of the roles that the great ape sanctuaries are fulfilling is providing homes and welfare for the rescued animals. My colleagues already talked about the legislation, the enforcement. Once the few that are being, dealt with, once they're confiscated, the sanctuaries are then providing the home for the confiscated animals. There are different kinds of sanctuaries that have been established and are in operation everywhere in the world. But from the perspective of sanctuaries in Africa, a good primate sanctuary in Africa has standards established under the umbrella of Pan-African Sanctuary Alliance. We have policies, we have standards of procedures, we have best practices that are defined on how the sanctuaries, great ape sanctuaries, should be managed. And we recently also had support from Arcus, helping Pan-African Sanctuary Alliance to determine the sustainability of great apes sanctuaries. Another role that the sanctuaries, sorry, I have a few slides on this, just to show about the welfare that are provided at the sanctuary. These are some of the chimpanzees that we had brought to Ngamba Island Chimpanzee Sanctuary in Uganda. That's one of them, Aikuru. That's what she looked like in 2001 when she was brought in, and that's what she looks like today. Connie, that's what she was looking like before and now. Naku, and that's one of our most recent rescued that we had last year from Southern Sudan, and Sarah, and you can see what she was like and what the sanctuary has been able to provide for her. She has all that smiling face right now. Another role that the sanctuaries play is environmental education. All good sanctuaries under the PASA umbrella all have environmental education programs, and we do carry out our environmental education program in partnership with the wildlife authorities, local communities, security agencies, the wildlife clubs in schools, and the general public. The sanctuaries also do provide opportunities for research. We have behavioral research taking place in the sanctuaries, but also in the field. And this is providing information that are being helpful to highlight the plight of the great apes. The sanctuaries are also helping with in situ conservation. A number of the PASA sanctuaries are engaged right now with the reintroduction program of the great apes in their sanctuaries. But besides that, we are also working with the rest of the conservation partners in our different countries, where we are trying to really get to the root cause of the problems, just to really get where the origins of the animals are and try and deal with the problems from the root cause. And some of the major findings are the habitats, like we have had before, the habitat destruction. And so we are working with the different wildlife authorities, the protected areas, and also we have a large number of great apes that are outside the protected areas, and that calls for very urgent attention. And a number of the different sanctuaries are working with the different authorities and landowners, and we're involved in forest conservation projects, payment for ecosystem services projects, mapping out corridors for the wildlife conservation, among others. Not all the sanctuaries do have ecotourism services, but the sanctuary that I work for, Ngamba Island Chimpanzee Sanctuary in Uganda, we have developed ecotourism services, and this also helps us to reach to different targets of the public out there internationally. We receive international tourists who come to visit the sanctuary, and they get to learn about the plight of the chimpanzees. And we have many times heard the testimonials from some of those international tourists who come to Ngamba saying, oh, I've always actually wanted to get a baby chimp, you know, as a pet. But after visiting, I think it's not a good idea. So that's one way that we are trying to help to educate the public. And with a case study of ecotourism project at Ngamba Island, it does take a well-designed and managed, you know, project to get all the benefits that ecotourism destination can provide. And this requires a carefully crafted protocols that minimizes the various risks, including diseases, you know, safety to the visitors, the animals, and to the staff themselves. Yeah, in conclusion, I would just like to say that from my personal experience, the future really lies in all of us working together more vigorously than we are doing right now, because there are lots of gaps that we still have, and we need to put in more effort. The partnership is very important, and we need to share the information of what is happening in the different countries and with the different projects. And to me, with the issue of illegal trade, most of what we are doing right now is really dealing with the symptoms. And for me, the future is getting down to protecting the habitats of the great apes. And if we protect the habitats, then, you know, it will be difficult for those who are trading in these great apes to get the opportunity to have it easy as they are having now. And just to give an example of what is happening in Uganda right now, we did a survey last year in partnership with the Jane Goodall Institute and WCS, and we found out there are 500 wild chimpanzee population on private land. And these forests are privately owned and communally owned, and almost every single day, part of the forests are being cut down. So these 500 individuals are at a great threat. And we have also been trying to track down the trend of the chimpanzees that are being brought to the sanctuary, where they're coming from. In the past 5 years, most of them, we have traced them to be coming from these private forests. If only these forests were well protected, then I do not think that it would have been very easy to have access, you know, to get the baby chimps for pets or for bush meat, for whatever the different uses are. Thank you.
Thanks, Lilly. A couple observations in listening to you talk and listening to all the presentations. There's discussion of numbers and accuracy of data, and that's a real seems to be a big weakness. One area where there's no lack of accuracy is how full the sanctuaries are. That's pretty concrete data. We know that they're full and probably continuing to fill. So I guess I'm wondering, in your experience on the enforcement side, one of the most pernicious aspects seems to be government complicity. Do you know of any instance where a government actually cooperated to stop their own corrupt employees? And do you think that's a productive way to address that aspect of the problem?
Well, there certainly is governments that do act against corrupt employees. For sure, there's many examples of people that has been criminally prosecuted, disciplinary measures were instituted. But again, there's some countries where this does not happen the way it should. And like I also mentioned during my presentation, one of the things that were identified during the missions to range states and that came out of the mouths of enforcement officers that were interviewed was that they also feel that corruption still remains a major challenge to effective law enforcement, and it's a very significant reality. So to answer your question, yes, there are governments that do take very good and very strict action against employees that engage in corruption or illegal activities. But then unfortunately, there are other countries where this doesn't happen as effectively as it should.
Naftali, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can just give a couple of concrete examples. In Congo, I mean, it's a process. So in Congo, we had one case where we knew of a gendarme, I think it was, that was illegally detaining a chimp, and it was a whole process. It was in a very, very remote area, you know, and so we really, really wanted to get a case against him, and it just didn't work. You know, we tried everything we could for months, and it didn't work, and we failed. Recently, it's not a great ape, but we just a few days ago brought about the arrest of a guy in the military who was illegally detaining a mandrill, and you know, now he's on trial. So it's a slow process. He's on trial. He's not being held while on trial. I would rather see him held while on trial, but it's something. So, you know, and we'll move forward, and then some other things. Probably the most impressive thing that I've heard of as an example is the Guinean CITES authority changing their management authority, who was believed to be involved in a lot of great apes trade, and he was removed from that post. So again, I really, really think that guy, or maybe not that guy, but there should be an investigation as to who is responsible, and they should go on trial. But yeah, there's a lot of hints pointing towards a few people.
Mm-hmm. Alain, do you have any thoughts about that? And
concerning this question, I think we have some countries that take some measures concerning those practices, corruption and other things. During my mission in Cameroon, I think the customs administration set a kind of guide of best practices that apply on all the employees of the administration. So in 1 year, I mean, you have to be noted on the best practice of the good action that you have done during these periods. And it is also a good thing that the World Customs Organization promotes. They have also set a kind of code d'éthique, ethics code, yeah, ethics code on for all the administrations, the customs administration all over the world, that have to be implemented on in the administrations. And one of the goal of my mission was also to promote good practice, best practice among the employee of the customs. So on one hand, you have to build the capacity of the customs, but the other side also you have to promote. I have to promote best practice on the daily activities of the customs. But some examples like this, I cannot report it. Only one, but I don't know how to explain you. It was in Central African Republic when I was there. Some of the colleagues are implicated on bushmeat, great ape bushmeat, but it was all in local level. So it was on local level, and the authorities have to punish them there, but I don't know how they do after my...
It's a daunting problem, and it just seems to kind of keep coming like the blob, and you can stop it a little bit here and stop it a little bit here. But one of the most heartening things that I've heard was this joint research project with Jane Goodall Institute and WCS, where it revealed a key kind of source problem. And I wonder if you can talk about any other projects that you know of, or that maybe the audience knows about, where you can really clearly identify, okay, private land is a gap in this net, and there's a lot of illegal, at least potential, if not already occurring, great ape trade flowing through that gap. Are there other things like that, where you're encouraged?
Well, definitely that's what we know from Uganda. I don't know about the other countries where similar, surveys have been done to establish this. But this study has really shown us where we need to be putting more effort, And I do hope that, the others can be encouraged to look outside the protected areas as well.
Yeah. It also seems like even though they're best practices, having a kind of a universal application through of enforcement or of best practices, what kind of impediments are there to having something more kind of uniformly in place across all of the key countries? And is there resistance to that at the local level? And do you even think that that is a legitimate way to approach just the enforcement side of things?
Well, we've been advocating very strongly a multidisciplinary approach to enforcement, especially with wildlife crime. There are so many different role players involved. You've got your wildlife authorities, your police authorities, your customs authorities, and very often you find that the interaction between these authorities are not what it should be. They very often operate in isolated pockets, don't share information, don't share intelligence. The one hand doesn't really know what the other hand is doing. And that's something that really needs to be looked at. Through Interpol, for example, is looking at, they have a NEST program at the moment, which aims to bring together different authorities to discuss these issues and to work together on these issues. And that's definitely what we should work towards, is to get better coordination and better intelligence sharing at operational level between the different role players, which in many countries currently do not exist.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a thought about that?
I fully agree. I fully agree. I think that it's a major obstacle that we need to get over. I think it happens probably in every country, in developed countries and in developing countries, that there's not perfect collaboration between authorities, but in developing countries, especially where there's a lot of sensitization needed, where maybe a customs official has never been briefed on what are the wildlife laws, these are super important. If the customs guy is the guy at the port, or if the police guy doesn't know, that he can't be, encouraging wildlife trade, he is supposed to be stopping it. If he sees that, he's supposed to arrest someone, not take the animal home.
Right, which, I mean, at a very basic level. Sorry, Alain.
Yeah, it is true because during the sensitization of the customs in the field, I met that they are not really collaboration between the different agencies that work in the same place. And one of my my goal was also to put these agencies together. And when I have a meeting with the customs, the NGOs are also invited, the police, transporters, all the persons that are involved on so we need to encourage cooperation between all the agencies in order to
Because, the bad guys, they don't have these problems. They've got money, they've got technology, they have no bureaucracy, they're very streamlined organizations, they're run like businesses. It's a daunting, daunting challenge.
I was thinking, I know, being an advocate for wildlife, that a lot of times rangers in all of the peace parks and wildlife parks there's money raised funds for them so that they make a decent wage, which gives them incentive, and a lot of them had been prior poachers, so they know what they're doing. And I was thinking, we in America had a huge problem with corruption at one point, and with the police force, the fire department, and a lot of different things. And what happened was, when there were unions, and two, the second thing was, they have a really good wage, and they're paid very well. If you look at the police department now, when they're dealing with huge amounts of drugs where they could sell, they could get the drugs, sell the drugs, make tons of money. And I'm sure there's some corruption, but for the most part, they do not. So there's high standards, and there's good pay, and there's unions. So I would like to discuss or talk to someone afterwards if you have any thinking on this, or how to implement that. How do we start a fund to actually pay better customs, to pay people better living wage, so that they aren't completely, and really have the integrity there with the people that work there, so that they're able to deal with the trafficking and the fundraising and all that.
So I know from experience with a film that we did recently on elephant poaching, that there are NGOs who are stepping up, private foundations, who are funding or augmenting the pay of rangers, in elephant range. Do you know of anything specifically directed towards great ape protection like that? Where they're augmenting the pay from the government, or they're actually paying rangers a competitive wage, so they're not tempted to participate either in the bushmeat trade or in out-and-out poaching for sale?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they'll do rewards-based pay. So basically, they'll, first of all, like you said, try and get that kind of baseline salary to be something respectable. And then secondly, have rewards-based bonuses, basically, for seizures. And then a lot of it is oriented, it's all evolving. At first, people did it based on purely on seizures, but now it's slowly starting to evolve more towards the arrests and getting the whole police job done, basically. I very much feel for what you're saying. I went up and stayed with Echo Guards on several occasions to try and also sent other people up to film undercovers so that I would know what happens, if there's not an expatriate there, if there's not a foreigner there, just to see what it's like. And yes, there are park rangers that are implicated in corruption, but their life is hard. they will have people coming through there threatening them. We've documented instances where people will threaten them with weapons. Military authorities will threaten them with weapons saying, you will not search this car, even though it's their mandate. So I fully agree with you. I think it's really important to have a standard of living for the people that are on the ground.
You, Naftali, had talked about the biggest palm oil concession is going to be happening. We also heard from the extraction panel yesterday. And then Lilly, I have heard you speak before, it was lovely, and you had mentioned something about before the farmers sell off their forests, or we sell off pristine forests where the animals live, to the palm oil industries or this extraction, you had a suggestion, and this also goes to you, of having fundraisers where people buy a hectare of forest for $27, and that you educate the farmers. I mean, you explain it, because you didn't talk about it today, because I think it's really helpful, and it's a great model.
Well, I'm sorry, are you asking a specific question?
She can explain it. It's a question that I think in answering it will explain my question. In relationship to how to save the forests, it's another solution.
It's just a pilot project that we are doing right now on the private land. We are implementing a 4-year project on payment for ecosystem services to try and see whether that would actually help motivate the private forest owners to keep the forest standing on their land, to try and protect the habitat of the great apes, the chimpanzees specifically in Uganda in this case. And we are, for this project, we are using the carbon payment rate, that is being used globally right now, but we will only have the report on whether this is actually, going to work to encourage, the private forest owners to protect their forests or not. The results will be out in April next year. So then we can publish this result and share this with everybody. If it works, then we can, encourage everybody to.
Right, so it's an incentivization program for them to maintain their land, I see. But is there a, I guess how big, I'm kind of curious about the scale of that, and how long will it be before you have some kind of assessment?
Well, we started the project 2 years ago, so we are right now undertaking the end-line, evaluation survey, and the analysis of the data should be done between now and April. We should have the results.
Interesting approach. Other questions? Yeah, here. Yes, with the orange scarf.
Yeah, the discussion has been very interesting. I'm glad it's Kalema Zikusoka from Conservation Through Public Health, and also on the board of Uganda Wildlife Authority, where I've got a bit more involved in illegal wildlife trade issues, because it's a major issue in Uganda like it is in other African countries. You talked about giving the rangers a respectable salary so that they're less tempted to poach. We recently doubled the rangers' salaries in Uganda, and now they're earning more than teachers or anyone else in their community. And so people who had left because of low salary want to come back. So we're hoping that it's going to have a big effect with reducing poaching and illegal activities.
Have you had a chance to assess whether it is having an impact? How long have the increased salaries been in play?
It started in June 2012. And we're looking at it. And actually, even when we talk to them, we tell them we're doing this because we want you to really become serious, stop poaching. And yeah, we're still measuring it, but we hope that, we told them it's tied to their performance, for sure. And then another question I wanted to ask was, we've had a recent incident in Uganda, which may not end up not being serious, but maybe addressing it to the CITES, to Ben. What is the policy on diplomatic gifts? Because it looks like if it's commercial trading of great apes in Appendix 1, it's not allowed. But what if it's not commercial? Because you have heads of state offering great apes to other countries, and it looks like it's not illegal, and it's a major issue. How could we stop that?
Well, trade in Appendix 1 specimens is regulated by Article 3 of the Convention. And I think the Convention is very clear, and there's absolutely no doubt that there is no exemption for diplomatic gifts. The same rules and conditions that applies to any other trade in Appendix 1 specimens applies to diplomats also.
Is it, I'm not aware of it as a problem. Is that a significant area where you're seeing significant amount of trade, or is it, obviously it would be very high profile, but, sorry, Lilly, go ahead.
Recently, the president of Uganda, sorry.
There has been a problem in Uganda, specifically with great apes. In 2003, we had our president, offering, chimpanzees from Uganda as diplomatic gifts to China. And just a few weeks ago, there was another offer of gorillas from Uganda to Thailand.
Wow, that's amazing. Amazing to me that isn't, of higher profile in terms of the reporting on it, the coverage of it, and the condemnation of that.
Well, again, it is possible to trade in Appendix 1 species as long as it's not commercial trade, but then the requirements of the article must be met, and there are several requirements. A scientific authority must look into this particular trade, whether it would jeopardize the survival of the species. A management authority needs to be satisfied that it's not commercial trade, and there's a whole range of a list of requirements that needs to be met. So it will very much depend on a case-to-case basis. But if you ask if there's a special rule that applies to diplomatic gifts, no, there isn't. All those conditions still needs to be met.
But the striking thing to me about it is that at that level, you shouldn't have to rely on a technical reading of the law. It should just be obvious. And that raises this other question about education, especially in demand countries. And what value do you think it has? You guys are obviously on the enforcement side. You see the negative impact of, or the failure of enforcement. What do you think about addressing demand as opposed to enforcement? How would you value it?
I have a very limited view on that. I consider those type of programs, very important. But from a law enforcement perspective, I think that the most important thing is that if people are committing crimes, that those crimes go punished, whether it's in a source country or in demand country. So, and that's the media aspect of what I was talking about in my presentation, that needs to be disseminated. If someone, in Congo for a while, we had these posters up that were great that said, chimpanzee plus money is equal to, jail bars or something like that. And, I one time saw a guy selling a chimp next to one of those. And that doesn't happen anymore now because now the jail time is real. If you're going to get arrested with that chimp and you're going to lose your chimp and your money and all that stuff, people, that's a form of education, and I think it's really important.
Absolutely. Okay, back, up there standing.
Someone wants to add.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify something on the offer of gorillas. We have since established, my name is Dr. Andrew Segwe, I'm the director of Uganda Wildlife Authority. We have established that Thailand did ask Uganda for the gorillas, but the president said that the offer would have to follow international conventions and the law. So that is what the situation is, and the Uganda government is going to make a statement to that effect.
Hi, we've got a couple of questions back here, actually. I'm just trying to I want to go back to the idea of illegal trade in apes. I'm trying to get my head around it. And specifically, I'm kind of curious what the panel's view is of whether this is organized or whether this is opportunistic. So the conventional thinking on illegal pet trade is that this is opportunistic, and it's resulting largely, certainly in Central Africa, it's resulting from poaching for bushmeat. So people eat apes, they like eating apes. Apes are poached for bushmeat purposes. Okay, and every once in a while, this is a conventional thinking on this, every once in a while, a baby chimp is saved because someone can make a little bit of extra money because people like baby chimps alive. Okay, so for example, to what extent is that happening? So, for example, the situation, the case study that Naf was explaining, you know, to what extent is that somebody poaching for bushmeat, knowing that there's some bad guy in Guinea who they can get a bit of extra money from for giving him this little ape, and that those apes that are being killed for bushmeat continue to be killed regardless. And to what extent is this an organized trade,
right,
where there's an actual demand? I think this is important,
yeah, it's a great
lest
question.
we focus in the wrong place.
Yeah.
One of the easiest ways to address that question is just to say that the whole range of great apes is really, really diverse. So something that's happening, a dynamic happening in Congo or in Gabon could be really different than what's happening in Guinea, and that's the case. So you have both. Without a shadow of a doubt, you have both. There's the opportunistic stuff, which is, there's a lot of it, unfortunately, because great apes are still valued for bushmeat in so many places in Central Africa. In Guinea, I can tell you that there's much less of that, and there's a lot more of the organized stuff. One of the factors that plays a big role in that is that there's a big, well, Guinea is a majority Muslim country, and Muslim people generally do not eat primates, so it's not an issue there. So, if, you know, there I'm confident that there's a lot of organized trade where, you know, you're going out, you're hunting, maybe even based on an order or something, and then fulfilling orders. And then, yeah, and I think in Central Africa there's opportunistic stuff, but again, this is what we're up against with the palm oil. You know, I mean, there's going to be more out there, more stuff, and there is organized stuff that takes advantage of the opportunistic trade. So there will be people based in cities knowing that in the villages in Central Africa there will probably be a few chimps lying around tied up to a truck or a tree or something like that. And then they will know that that is a place where they can go to provide themselves with something. And then the organization starts a little bit further down.
I think that's a really great answer, because it does illustrate how kind of undefined in a way, but opportunistic at the end of the day this trade is. Because once you have a supply chain set up for whatever, whether it's weapons, drugs, or wildlife, you know, you can fill that chain with anything. If you got a truck leaving A going to B, and its, you know, primary goods are drugs or weapons, they've always got extra space, and these guys they see it as an opportunity to make, you know, other money. So I think that's a great way to think about it, because it's an awfully difficult problem down in the front.
I've been approached and have provided money for rewards to NGOs and trusted people in NGOs. Good idea or bad idea?
What do you think, rewards?
For the NGOs themselves, or for who?
No, for rangers to use to receive or give rewards for information to provide interdiction for established routes and networks.
Kind of incentive.
For apprehension and to enhance enforcement.
Incentive payments, you know, for rangers, et cetera.
Rangers for them to give to the community.
Mm-hmm.
To have a good informer system is very important and always very valuable. There's many cases that cannot be solved without an informer system, and people that you can actually task to go and gather information for your investigation. It is something that needs to be very well structured, though. You need to have a policy on informer handling and informer management within the authority that deals with these investigations, if you ever want to do something like that, because there is also a lot of room for abuse of such a system if it's not well regulated. So I think the key thing is, if you do envisage getting involved in something like that, that the organization that you would work with, or the government agency that you would work with, first establish a clear policy on how that system will be managed.
Mm-hmm. Directly behind him.
It's been a very calm and polite discussion, but I imagine some people in the audience are seething, and certainly if one person who isn't here was here, it would have been a much livelier discussion. Yesterday I received an email from Alain, who many people will know as a photographer and investigator of bushmeat and live animal trade. And if you visit Carl's website, you'll see documentaries exposing well-known, ongoing ape-dealing syndicates based in Nigeria, with connections in Egypt, based in Guinea, with connections in DRC. Carl has been to China and seen the apes which were illegally transported to China under false permits, performing in circuses, riding bicycles, doing tricks. As China's economy and Thailand's economy and other Asian countries boom, there is a huge demand for entertainment. So this is not a thing of the past. It may be in the past in the West, we may be gradually moving away from use of apes in circuses, but in these booming economies, there is a huge demand. And to have this quiet discussion, looking like, oh, it's basically okay, just a little bit of a problem, Carl has documented organized criminal gangs who not only pick up the occasional opportunistic ape, but go out to catch apes. They keep the apes in the villages because in cities they might get caught. So there is organized crime involved in this. The criminals are also doing other wildlife crime, and the enforcement that we're seeing is not up to the task. So I'm wondering if any of the people who have presented would comment on why Carl's exposés of individuals and Carl's requests for import and export permits, because obviously the receiving country has to issue an import permit before the exporting country issues an export permit, why those are given with no due diligence to find out whether there is a captive ape breeding facility in Guinea or in any other country where they're recorded to be, and put a stop to this. There's not that many individuals involved, but those who are involved are organized and need serious attention, and we're not seeing that, and I'm not hearing that from the presentations today. Thank you.
Any response to that? Yeah, Naftali?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I think that, you know, pressuring, this is the same discussion that we have for ivory. I mean, we're all going a little bit nuts on the lack of attention being driven towards demand countries. In terms of, you know, what you said is totally legitimate. At the same time, what their defense is going to be is that they're sovereign countries, they're obeying their national laws. So, you know, nothing's wrong. You know, they couldn't have known that these permits were illegal. So they're not stupid. They'll cover themselves. They will cover themselves legally 100%. So if there's a hole, if there's a legal loophole, we need to expose that. We can't just say that we think that this is happening. We have to have concrete proof that there is a legal, you know, that somebody has broken a law in China or in Thailand or wherever, you know, that demand country is. And then, you know, get back to CITES and push through resolutions that might force people to do things like DNA testing. They can show where chimps are from. You know, the stuff that's been documented going through Egypt, for example, that might be what I was talking about, you know, opportunistic, maybe for starters in somewhere, you know, in Cameroon or in Congo or something like that, which then led to organized networks in Nigeria, trafficking this stuff out through Kenya, Egypt. And so yeah, so some of that stuff can be pushed through on a political level so that we can, you know, be a little bit more creative. And then Guinea, yeah, I mean, the same stuff that was documented recently as well is really important. These are definitely organized networks.
Involving not only chimpanzees, but bonobos to Armenia, gorillas to China, although no one knows where they are, presumably dead, and this question of the gorillas to Thailand. It's happening, and evidence is being presented to responsible authorities, but we're not seeing the action, we're not seeing the investigations and the arrests. So Carl has called for a commission of inquiry to look at the evidence, assess it, and if it's found to be accurate, to act on it. I don't know what the panel would think to that, but there is a body of evidence which seems not to be being acted on, and I would urge all those involved to act on it.
Maybe to speak from a CITES Secretariat side, we've been in continuous correspondence with Mr. Rahman, and he's raised many of these issues with us. Now, if we look at the trade between Guinea and China, which is one of the major issues that he is raising with us, this trade was very thoroughly dealt with by the Secretariat. When we initially detected the trade between Guinea and China, we raised our concerns with both these parties and then requested to conduct a mission to Guinea to actually go and look at the implementation of the convention in the country. Eventually an invitation to go to Guinea didn't come forward, and after we raised the whole issue at the 61st meeting of the CITES Standing Committee, that invitation came forward. And the mission was conducted. During that mission, significant problems with the implementation of the convention in Guinea was detected. And a very comprehensive list of recommendations was formulated for Guinea to implement to address the problems that were identified. There were also concerns about illegal and corrupt activities. The Secretariat actually met with the head of the anti-corruption unit within Guinea as well as the head of the Interpol office, and these activities were reported to that office. Now, I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding of the mandate and what international organizations can do. At the end of the day, the responsibility to investigate those allegations lies with your national authorities. We do not have, as a CITES Secretariat or as the Interpol General Secretariat, supernatural powers to go into a country and conduct an investigation. You relay the information to the relevant and responsible authorities within that country, and they then need to react to that information and conduct the investigation. Immediately following the mission, the Secretariat indeed also published a notification to the parties, which clearly stated the concerns with regard to permits, the validity of permits issued by Guinea. And this notification also informed parties that the Secretariat established during its mission that there is no captive breeding facilities in Guinea. So all of this has been done. Permits that were received from Guinea were also analyzed by a consultant that were hired by the Secretariat to facilitate its reporting to the Standing Committee. The analysis of these permits exposed further problems with the implementation of the convention. All of this information was taken to the 62nd meeting of the Standing Committee. And as a result of that, the Standing Committee requested the Secretariat to issue a warning with Guinea, to Guinea with a list of minimum actions to be implemented in the country. And these actions had to be implemented by the end of 2012. Guinea did not implement these actions, which then eventually led to a suspension of all trade in CITES listed specimens in March 2013. So this whole issue has been dealt with very thoroughly. But at the time when China imported these animals, China complied with all the requirements of the convention. They got an export permit from Guinea. They actually contacted Guinea and verified if this permit is legitimate. Guinea confirmed that it was, and the export happened and the import happened. Now, after that happened, it came to light that all of these permits might not have been legitimate. Reality of the matter is, this is now a matter for national legislation within China, and they need to look at their national legislation and determine if in terms of national legislation it is illegal. China has raised this particular exports at the Standing Committee and at the COP, and they clearly made it known that they regard it as legal because they complied with the convention. So this is one of the issues that you deal with where you have a system. There has been a problem in the system on the Guinea side where permits were fraudulently issued. That has been addressed through a trade suspension. Yeah.
But I think it points up the inherent frustration with it. It's a sieve. And it's, you know, even in an instance where, you know, people are complying with the requirements, they're falsifying or they're behaving, you know, fraudulently because there are incentives here, massive incentives to get around the law. And so I understand this frustration. I don't know if there are other questions. We're close to the end here. Yeah.
Just a few things. First of all, I think we really have, some of you touched on this, I think we really have to elevate the illegal trade in wildlife beyond just being a wildlife issue and turn it into a national security issue and a global security issue, which I think is happening. The fact that you have people like Hillary Clinton involved in it now, putting together a special commission looking at this, I think that's something to be encouraged in many other countries, in the EU and China and a number of the countries that are also buying a lot of this, illegal wildlife. I'd also like to really tip my hat to the work of Naftali and also your colleague Ophir in Laga. I mean, you guys are doing an amazing job, so much on the front lines, and I just want everyone to recognize how high risk that work is. It's really terrific and very special. And lastly, I'd like to just take note of the fact that today is also World Rhino Day. And if there's any group of organisms that are getting more heavily impacted than great apes, it's certainly the rhinos. In Kruger National Park this past year, 600 rhinos poached. So I think we can make common cause with a lot of these other groups of flagship species that are being heavily impacted by this illegal trade. Thanks.
Last question.
Basically, it's interesting to talk about trade, but is this really the problem? I think the domestic trade is a much bigger issue than the international trade. And is it a problem, or is it just a symptom of failure? Is it a byproduct of the fact that we're losing the forests at an alarming rate? And I just want to bring some numbers, yeah? We recently had a Paso workshop, and we were talking about people with dozens of chimps and dozens of gorillas. And if you look back at the orangutan situation, since rehabilitation centers began in the 70s, we're talking at least 2,900 orangutans that have been brought into centers, at least. And the number of prosecutions of people illegally keeping orangutans is actually 0. The number of stings that were made where people were actually prosecuted for trading orangutans is 3. So this is desperate. And I have extreme admiration for the guys in Laga putting their necks on the line. And I don't know how to get that situation going in Asia as well. Maybe it's a funding issue, maybe it's something else, maybe it's just nerve. But this is a serious problem, domestic trade. But again, I don't lose sight of the fact that this is a symptom of habitat loss. If you look at the 2,900, let's say that we get 50% of the babies. Let's say that for every baby ends up in captivity, a mother is killed, which is sure. Let's say for every mother that's killed, there's a male killed as well. You're talking 1 in 6. So we're talking about 15 to 20,000 animals that have been the result of deliberate killing by humans. That's not even discussing the ones that have died of malnutrition and everything else due to the palm oil industry. So my point is, let's not forget the orangutans. Let's think about the scale of this problem, and let's put things into perspective, and let's do whatever we can to get some more people in prison in Indonesia.
Thank you.